One of the questions I've been asking, as I'm sure you have in recent weeks, is how do we find peace in the midst of all the chaos? Jesus is someone we can learn from, obviously, in everything, but this is something he had to perfect, and he did. He endured storms that were metaphorical. He endured storms that were literal. One of my favorite storm stories of Jesus comes in Mark chapter 4, where he's in the middle of the storm. He's fast asleep. The disciples are kind of terrified that they're all going to die. They turn around expecting to find him helping them, and instead he's napping. And then this is the conversation that they have when they wake him up. It says, Mark chapter 4, verse 38, the disciples woke him and said, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" That's the first of 4 questions that happens in this little exchange. He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, questions 2 and 3, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, question number 4, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Those 4 questions, I think, speak to our spirits about how we find peace in chaos. Question number 1 is a question we all ask of God in suffering. Where are you? Don't you care? Don't you care if we drown, God? Look around you at the storm. Why? It seems like you're fast asleep. I've asked that question of God multiple times over recent weeks, and I've asked it at various points in my own life when we've been through difficult things. My experience has been rarely does God answer with a 50-point email explanation as to why he, isn't intervening in the way that I want him to. But what he does do is he answers with his presence. And that might sound cliched, but it's really not. The way that God communicates his love to us, and this is one of the things I love about being a Christian, is not in words spoken to us across a void, but in the word made flesh. He speaks his love to us by becoming so close that he actually becomes a person. He becomes one of us. Imagine I said to you, "Hey, I really love goldfish. Mike's got a fish pond, and I'm thinking about becoming a goldfish." You would say to me, "You're crazy, Andy. You've got a brilliant mind. Can't you remember things from 2 and sometimes even 3 days ago? You want to give up that to get the tiny little brain of a goldfish? You must be nuts, right?" But imagine I said, it's gonna happen. And I had an operation, it all went fine, and I became a goldfish. And you came to visit me in the pond. You would walk away utterly baffled about so much. But the one thing you'd be so clear about is, wow, Andy really did love fish. That guy must love fish. If he's going to give up all of this to become a fish, he must be really into fish. Well, the idea of me becoming a fish is less ridiculous than the idea of the creator of the universe becoming a tiny little baby and growing up as a carpenter from Nazareth. But that's what he does to communicate his love to us. And my experience in suffering, and maybe you can relate to this, is so often when I'm at my lowest, God whispers to me. And it may be through a Bible verse, it just really speaks to me. It may be through someone praying for me. It may be through a little random coincidence that happens. But he speaks to me. And what I know he's doing when he gives me those little whispers is he's saying, "I'm with you, Andy. I'm with you, Andy." And those whispers, they point back to his great shout when he makes that statement, "I'm with you," by becoming Emmanuel, God with us. So here's this presence that communicates that he does care, even in the midst of our suffering. And in fact, what Jesus said to his disciples in John chapter 16, verse 33, is not that they wouldn't have suffering, that suffering or lack of suffering would be a sign of his favor. He promised his followers, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart because I've overcome the world." And basically what he's saying is, I'm going to be with you and we're going to face it together. So it's his presence that communicates he cares. Then I love it because in the midst of the mill pond stillness that is now Lake Galilee, God asks some questions of his disciples. And in the midst of moments of stillness, while this pandemic is going on, there will still be moments of quiet that we might be able to find for ourselves. And in those, even if it's just 5 minutes of stillness, we want to allow God to pose questions to us. And Jesus says to his disciples, "Why are you afraid?" And I think he really wants to know the answer. And where do I start? Lord, I'm afraid because my health is bad and I'm vulnerable. I'm afraid because someone I love is particularly vulnerable. I'm afraid because I'm a control freak and I feel very out of control. I'm afraid because of the finances. I'm afraid because of my job. I'm afraid because of all the unknowns about the future. Where do I begin with why I'm afraid? And then there's this follow-up question, and I think Jesus says it so kindly. He says, do you still not trust me? And as I've just pondered this passage to do this, that's really spoken to me, that question. And what I've realized for me is, why am I afraid? Number one, my little boy is on the vulnerable list. Number two, I am a control freak. I could go on, but those are probably the top of the list ones. And, and he's just asked me that question, do you still not trust me? And I've realized the reason I'm afraid at heart, at bottom, is because with these particular things on this particular day, I'm not trusting you. It's about trust. And if I trusted you, I wouldn't be afraid in the way that I am. And again, it's not a rebuke. I just think it's him trying to help us to see, oh, that's what's going on. I'm just not able to trust you with this aspect of my life at the moment. And then the solution to that is not to beat ourselves up. Oh, try harder to trust. The solution to that is to see the answer to question number 4 in the passage. Because the disciples, after the storm stops, right? So they're terrified because they're about to die. Think how scary that is, right? Then the storm stops and they become even more afraid. And they turn to each other and they say, who is this guy? Even the wind and the waves obey him. And the great solution to our kind of like trusting God more is to just get the answer to that, who he is. Who is it we've got in the boat of our lives? Who is it that's fighting our corner? God. And God is not a stress ball that you can put in your pocket and squeeze every now and then when you feel like you need one. He doesn't fit in our pockets. If he could, if he was small enough to fit in our pockets, he wouldn't be big enough to calm the storms. So he's God Almighty, the living God, the creator of heaven and earth, the Lord, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. It's the Lion of the tribe of Judah that we follow, and he's in our boat. And so he's untamable and he's unpredictable, but he's never unfaithful. He's never unfaithful. And when I remember who it is who's with me in this and what he's proven through his track record in everything we read in the New Testament, what he shouts through the pages of the stories of the Gospels, as well as what he whispers to us in the tiny little ways that we hear him speaking today, when I get that, then I think, do you know what? Maybe I can take a nap too.